Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast which asks the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George, and today we're asking, what did we learn over the past year? Hello and thank you so much for downloading this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. You can find all of our previous episodes on our website, which is deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And this week's episode is a little bit special, actually. We're wrapping up another fantastic year of Green Room podcasts. And naturally, we're feeling a little bit nostalgic. We're feeling at the end of the year, it's a bit reflective. And so we thought we'd take a look back at some of the highlights from the last year and reflect on all the fantastic and amazing guests that we've had on the Green Room podcast and tackling some really interesting conversations as well. So, but I can't do this on my own. So I am thankfully joined by my magnificent co-hosts, Ethan Worth and Lizzie Elston. How are you both?
Hey George, yeah, we're well. I'm certainly feeling up for a bit of nostalgia. Just in preparing for today's episode, was just completely blown away by the sheer number of questions that we've attempted to answer over the past year, and some of the content that we've heard. It's just been an amazing year. So really looking forward to having a chat about it all. And I just have to commend you on your Santa hat as well. You're looking fantastic there today, George.
Thank you very much. It is the season.
And Lizzie, you've got your special ears on, so I think you're probably bringing the festivity the most.
I mean, I think this is definitely an occasion for glitterball dealy boppers. So had to be done.
I'm squeezed into a very old Christmas jumper and feeling very sweaty, and it's very tight on me, which is not a great reflection of the pandemic years.
I can just see a pair of antlers sticking up on your jumper, Ethan. Show us the full effect. What have you got there? Okay, that is a lovely, sparkly-looking reindeer. I like it.
Very good. And so before we get cracking and try and work out what we've actually learned this year, I think it's probably obligatory to have a bit of an icebreaker, isn't it?
Clearly. So here we go. Oh, good one. Can you sum up your year in 3 words? Shall I have a go?
Go on, Lizzie. Yeah.
All right. Enlightening, inspiring, educational. That's just the podcast, by the way. That's not like the whole year of my, everything going on in my life. But the podcast has definitely been those 3 things for me.
Oh, I mean, they are big words. I was thinking more test, trace, isolate.
What about you, George? Come on, give us 3 really good words.
Oh, well, I certainly can't do that. I think if it was about the whole year, they would be after the watershed words. But I think if it's about the podcast, then definitely educational. I'll steal one of yours, Lizzie. Definitely educational, fascinating. I think I've probably said that word on every single episode in the last year, and inspirational as well. So without further ado, we need to try and work out what we've learned this year. So Lizzie, if I could come to you first, what has been your favourite moment on the podcast this year?
So it's really hard just to come up with one. It's so hard. I've had a few. One of them actually was, I don't know if you remember, George, when my then 8-year-old Oliver joined one of the episodes, which I think was sort of the first one of the year, about light at the end of the tunnel, and he desperately wanted to be in the podcast, and you asked him, Oliver, what do you think? Do you think there's light at the end of the tunnel? And he just replied, I don't really know what that means, but yeah. So that made us all laugh, and I quite enjoyed that. It would be remiss of me not to say that one of my favourite moments clearly was meeting Laura Kenny, that was such an exciting episode to be part of, and she was just so fabulous to kind of chat to, so down to earth and so inspiring. So that's definitely been a highlight of my green room journey. And so yeah, those are a couple of my favourite moments for sure.
I think it goes without saying that Oliver was easily the number one guest of the whole year. I think
Laura,
I think, and Laura Kenny was great as well. My personal highlight with her was there was a bit of I think it was an off-camera moment actually, but it was introducing my dog to her over Zoom. I think that probably spurred on Team GB to winning success in Tokyo over the summer.
Definitely. What about you, Ethan? What was your favourite moment of the year?
Well, Lizzie, I wasn't on either of those episodes, and they were two of my favourite moments of the year. Actually, I did meet Oliver, and that was great. I think for me, it was probably recording episode number 32, Can a Business Make Money and Do Good at the Same Time? And that was after our summer hiatus. And so it was great to be back, great to reunite with the pod. And also, if I'm honest, I was a little skeptical coming into that episode about what we would discuss. Would there be any kind of real substance? Because it's quite a difficult question. And I thought it was really informative and in a practical way, and also quite a challenging way. And both guests were fantastic. So that was probably my favourite. And we've mentioned favourite moments. And what is a favourite moment without our great guests? So of course, we've talked about Laura Kenny. Who else are some of our favourite guests that we've met this year?
Yeah, I think my favorite guests of the year, and we've had so many. Looking back, pretty much everyone has an envious job title, and that's a real reflection of the quality of guests that we've had on over the last year. But one of my favorite guests is one we had on recently, actually, Peter Holbrook, who's the CEO of Social Enterprise UK, and he just came onto the podcast with a real gusto, a real bit of energy, and that was exactly what we needed for our episode when we discussed how to start a movement. And actually, he was a very inspirational guy, and helped with my own anxieties about how to start a conga at the wedding party I was going to that week. So he was definitely a top guest for me personally.
You answered the how to start a movement question very literally.
Exactly. It's sometimes you have to be literal on these things. Yeah. But Lizzie, who was your favorite guest?
Again, it's really hard just to get to one guest. So I'll name three if that's okay. So first of all, Baroness Ford. So she joined us for the episode about trust in business, and she was such a fascinating and inspiring person to talk to. And I think, George, you'll remember how humble we were when we were listening to sort of what Baroness Ford defined as trust, and she gave the story of her daughter who was going to be undergoing brain surgery, and the trust that she put in the surgeon conducting that surgery. And that was just an amazing conversation to be part of. So she's definitely one of my favourites. I love talking to Susie de Rohan-Wilner, CEO of Toast. And in fact, that conversation with Susie and also Katie Holdsworth, our own Katie Holdsworth, just the chat that we had about sort of, breaking into a man's world as a woman, and some of the lessons that they'd learned in the process. That was a really fun conversation. And I'd probably also put Peter Holbrook up there with Calvin Dillon, that discussion we had recently. Peter was, as you say, he was just such a ball of energy. It was great fun having him on the show. So that's three of many.
And Lizzie, I completely agree about Susie and Katie. I mean, first of all, it was a Lizzie and Ethan special, which I love.
I love that as well. Yeah.
Let's work for you, George. And I just thought it was really interesting how I remember that when we asked them if they want to be part of the podcast, they both had that initial imposter syndrome reaction of thinking, really me? Can I hold the mantle of being a rule-breaking woman? And of course, it was a great episode, and we've never really had a reaction like that from a male guest, which is quite interesting in itself. But I just thought they brought a really personal element, as well as delving into some of the deeper issues about gender inequality and structural barriers. And of course, they lived on the same street, so it really was like having a chat with friends.
So we've talked about some favourite moments. We've talked about guests. So yeah, what about the lessons we've learned? Because there's been so much that we've talked about. We've been party to conversations. George, what about you? What are some of the lessons that you've learned from the last year?
Well, I think every time you do one of these episodes, or you interview some of these really fantastic people, you definitely come away with something and to think about. And what hit home most, I think, was the conversation we had with Jackie Henry, our managing partner of People and Purpose, and Jalorn Victor, who's Chief International Officer at Headspace. And actually that whole conversation, which was talking about well-being in the context of the workplace, was just came at just the right time, really. A fantastic conversation after at the time it was about 18 months worth of pandemic disrupting all of our lives and how we work and how we interact with people and things. And speaking to Jalorn was very enlightening, really, and reassuring that actually, you know, the well-being and the sort of conversations around well-being and mental health right up there on the agenda. So that was that was really good. That was a great thing to keep in mind after that particular episode. And then the other thing I probably learned was that I should buy an electric car, but I probably can't afford to buy an electric car, was after our electric vehicles episode with Dash Gupta from Marshall Motors, which is a fantastic episode as well. Yeah,
I loved that episode actually. When do you remember when Dash was able to reel off his registration plate from his very first car when he was about 17 years old? That was a great moment. What about you, Ethan? What have you learnt?
Similarly to George, I think for me it's been a lot around shining the light on areas in business and probably a reflection of broader society that are progressing but still have a long way to go. And I think one of those areas is disability. So I think our most recent episode on how the conversation about disability at work is changing was really eye-opening. I learned a lot about the barriers that are preventing disabled people from entering the workforce. So I think we spoke about on that podcast that only 50% of disabled people are in work compared to 80% of non-disabled people. And we also spoke about how for every 100 disabled people that are entering the workforce, 120 leave it, which was mind-blowing to me. And then another area that's being talked about more is, of course, mental health, as George mentioned. And I think George has covered most of the things there, but one statistic that really stayed with me is that 41% of employees have suffered mental health issues caused or worsened by work just in the last year. So I think those two for me were both very eye-opening, as I've said.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? So I think one of the lessons I've learned, I don't know if it's something I've learned so much as sort of perhaps cemented something I knew deep down, but it was something that came out of the podcast with both Laura Kenny and also with Susie and Katie on the sort of women's International Women's Day episode, and that was a simple lesson to be yourself at work and to be a good leader, to be yourself. And a personal anecdote I've got about this actually is many years ago I was receiving some feedback from a partner I worked with. It was a different Big Four firm, and he was giving me some feedback, and I'll never forget it because he said to me, and if you're a younger viewer, perhaps cover your ears. He said, "Lizzie, you need to be a bit more of a bitch." And he was a really lovely guy. What the point he was trying to make was be more assertive, show your tough side, be a bit more assertive. And I've never forgotten it. And at the time, I remember thinking, God, how do I do that? How do I be more of this sort of person that he wants me to be? And I came to realize over time that I was never going to be that person. I'm far too afflicted with wanting to be liked, but of course could work on being more assertive. But the most important thing that you have to be is yourself. And if I'd tried to be something I wasn't, then that wouldn't have been authentic, and I wouldn't have been a good leader in any way. So that was a great lesson that came out for me.
Absolutely, Lizzie, and I can't see you ever being that person. But speaking of being yourself at work, I think we've been asked to discuss funniest, most embarrassing moments, and of course, George always brings his full self to the podcast. So I think probably mine is George inviting himself over to Natalie Campbell's house, who's the CEO of Blue Water, multiple times in the podcast. And then I think even when we signed off, you signed off by asking to pick up some free Blue Water when you went round to her house. So
yeah, slightly. That's a. Yeah, well, I'm glad that was a good moment for you there, Ethan. So, and I'm still waiting on that free bottle of Blue Water. So, but Christmas is coming up, so maybe Father Christmas could do me nicely there. I think I have too many embarrassing moments, I think, to think about. But I mean, but one thing is, it's sometimes we do discuss some really hard hitting topics, but and not that we're doing it, we obviously don't go out there trying to do a disservice, but there is a kind of comic relief in lots of the conversations that we have, and I think that's hopefully recognised by the listeners of this, that we're trying to tackle some tricky questions, but in an accessible way, I think. So there's been multiple occasions where you sort of had to pause the recording while we let the laughs and giggles settle a bit, but to choose one is very, very difficult, I think. So yeah. Lizzie, how about you?
Yeah, George, I hope you don't mind if one of my funniest moments actually was yours.
It's outrageous. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't one I was in, but it was one I listened to that you two did. And it was, the icebreaker was about what would be your one food that you would eat if you could only have one food for the rest of your life. And I'm still laughing now, George, because your answer was canapes.
Yeah.
And it just sums you up. It's brilliant and never change. I love it.
You can, I mean, you can't have enough canapes, really. You can have, like, constant serving of canapes would be great. Yeah.
On that same episode, I think that was when Jalore and Victor told us about 20 minutes to eat a raisin as a way of demonstrating mindfulness, which I really enjoyed, and I thought was a good example of experiencing mindfulness versus just talking about it. But yeah, very, very interesting anecdote from Jalore.
That was a good tip. I have to say I haven't quite tried that one yet, but maybe that could be a New Year's resolution for us all to give that a go.
Absolutely. Maybe do it with a Terry's chocolate orange or something more festive.
Or a canapé.
So we've been fairly reflective, but can I ask you guys, what are you most looking forward to next year on the podcast?
I'm looking forward to getting into the top 1% of all podcasts, because we're already in the top 5%, and we're just going to go from strength to strength, guys. So, anyone listening, watch this space. The Green Room is going places.
I couldn't quite remember the statistics. I've already told my family we're top 2%, so I think we need to get there then next year.
Absolutely.
That's good. Well, I think what I'm looking forward to most is actually, recording live in person again, because we haven't done that for the entire year. So, with any luck, it's who knows what's going to happen. But that, I think, a key resolution should be to, see you in the flesh, face to face, recording live, and maybe filming a few podcasts as well. I think it'll be good. That's just to keep evolving that way. But that's what I'm looking forward to most. Yeah.
And do you guys have any guests or topics that are on your wish list this year for Christmas?
I mean, I think I've mentioned before that I'd quite like to get George Clooney in, but I still think we're quite far from that. But I'll keep wishing. You've asked, right? So we can only hope. I so loved the episode where we talked to Laura Kenny, and it wasn't, obviously Laura's a fantastic guest, but it was also the topic of performance and leadership, and I quite like the idea of doing every season doing something with a top sports star. So I thought we could maybe start with Jurgen Klopp. I'd quite like to get him on. So Pod Squad, if you could make that happen, that would be great. And someone like Roger Federer, I think, if we can get him as well. I mean, I'm not aiming too high here. Just some accessible guests that we can come along.
So there seems to be a bit of a theme here, Lizzie, with Clooney, Klopp, and Federer. But
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it is an audio podcast, though, I'm afraid. But yeah, I think what I'm looking forward to. We've covered loads of the conversation Ethan mentioned earlier about which we had about disability was fascinating, and actually I'd like to sort of do a bit more around that, and maybe look at neurodiversity as a topic, because that's something which is getting a lot of attention at the moment, and I think that we could hopefully try and do justice around that. And I don't know, there's so many things we could cover, really, and that's the beauty of this. So if I had a dream guest, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I'd go down the sort of Federer. Ryan Reynolds, he'd be good fun. Will Ferrell, fun. Yeah. We have to wait and see on that one.
I read.
What about you, Ethan?
So I read an article today on BBC around how Taylor Swift is being sued for some of her lyrics in Shake It Off, and I thought that might be interesting, something around the dichotomy between copyright and creativity, and maybe we will have to get Taylor Swift herself in on the show, which will be a nice bonus for me as well.
I think that is absolutely brilliant, Ethan, because we've even got an intellectual property advisory practice at Deloitte. So, what could be better?
Perfect. And I love how me and you, Lizzie, just went down the Crushers route, whereas George was very sincere. Thanks, George.
Fantastic. And then, Ethan, I think you might you might have a bit of a quiz up your sleeve. Is that right? I don't want to put you on the
Well,
spot.
it's nothing like Christmas, George, without a nice family quiz for the podcast family. So we have 5 questions. I'll try and keep them relatively short. I was hoping to do a Finish the Carol quiz, but that was vetoed due to the world just not being ready for George's singing voice. So we've got some more standard questions. So for our holiday season quiz, question 1, and this is linked to episode number 25. Do we care more about a brand or what they stand for? So this one's about brands. So which brand has successfully marketed itself in Japan to be the go-to meal on Christmas Day, with an estimated 3.6 million Japanese families selecting this as their Christmas meal of choice?
I think I know the answer. I think I do.
Okay.
Can I make a guess?
You are our brand's woman.
Well, I picked this up actually only because I was listening to a conversation that my son was having with his friend the other day, and the friend said it was KFC. Is that right?
It is indeed KFC.
Oh, the things you learn from your children. Brilliant.
There you go. That's 1-0 to Lizzie. And apparently, according to KFC, Christmas sales account for 1/3 of all KFC sales in Japan. It's that popular.
This is excellent pub quiz knowledge here. This is very good.
Question 2, and again, going to link it to one of our episodes. So this is linked to episode 29. Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Or also episode 4, can one small change save the planet? So this one's around light and it's around climate change. So the conversation about climate change is only getting louder. And this holiday season, light pollution is back on the agenda. How much brighter does the world get during the period between Thanksgiving and New Year, according to NASA estimates? Is it A, 20%, B, 50%, or C, 200%?
Oh my goodness. I'm going to say 20%.
20%? Lizzie?
Well, I can't give the same answer, can I? I'm going to go to the other extreme. I'm going to say 200%.
You are both wrong. Unfortunately, it is B, 50%.
Really? That's amazing.
Still a huge amount. Yeah, apparently across the globe between those months because of all the different festivities going on.
Wow.
Okay, question 3, which is linked to episode 11. Are our cities ready for the future? Which city hosts what is estimated to be the world's largest New Year's Eve party? It hosts it each year, and it's estimated to be attended by around 2.5 million people. So which city hosts this party?
Oh, I mean, I'll make it. I know it's another guess, but I think is it Edinburgh?
It's not Edinburgh. That's a good guess, though.
That is a good guess.
Hogmanay celebrations.
I'm going to say Sydney.
No, not Sydney either. But in where I got this information, they were both mentioned, those cities. But apparently, the number one.
Is it somewhere between Edinburgh and Sydney?
It is. You go one way around the world. It's Rio de Janeiro.
Oh, there you go.
The Cabana Beach, apparently.
Yeah, that does sound quite good fun, I think. So, yeah.
Okay, two more left. So question 4, this is linked to episode number 9. Can creativity change the world? So how long did it take Mariah Carey to write her hit song, All I Want for Christmas Is You? A, 15 minutes, B, 30 minutes, or C, 1 hour?
Wow.
I'll say, what was B? 30 minutes. Is that what you said?
I said B, yeah.
On B.
I'm going to say, well, it's an absolute classic. So it must have just come to her in a moment of inspiration. 15 minutes, that's about as long as it would take to write it down, I think. So, yeah.
15 minutes is correct.
Oh, there you go.
You pulled level with Lizzie on 1 point.
1-1. Here we go.
It is the decider. And I mean, that creativity really did change the world, for the better or the worse, depending on your views of that song. Personally, I love it. Okay, finally, linked to episode number 6, Is It Tough at the Top, where we talked to our CEO, Richard Houston. This question is all about the CEO of Christmas, Santa Claus. So Santa Claus is apparently based on St. Nicholas, but which modern day country does St. Nicholas originate from?
I think I know this.
Ooh. For the win, George.
I think it's Turkey.
It is turkey.
Oh, George, I'm impressed.
Doubly
What a
festive.
comeback.
Yeah.
Well,
Well
congrats.
done. Well done.
Sorry. Well, fantastic, Ethan. As ever, very engaging quiz. Hopefully, all our listeners think so as well. But I think it's probably time to wrap up with this week's big question, which is, what have we learned from the podcast this year? Lizzie, I'm going to pick on you.
Okay, right. I'm gonna cheat a little bit with this answer. Right. So this is what I've learned this year. I've learned. Does the way we bank leave some people behind? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Are women rewriting the rules? Should my next car be electric? Can a business make money and do good at the same time? What is the secret to performing at your best? What does it take to trust a business? And more recently, I've learned, how do we create work that's good for our well-being? How do you start a movement? And how is the conversation about disability at work changing? Now, if that's not something I've learned, then I give up.
Lizzie, I tell you what, I'm feeling absolutely exhausted after hearing all of that, but you've summarized brilliantly all that we have learned over the last year. And without further ado, I just want to say a final thank you to our listeners. Thank you to Ethan and Lizzie. Thank you to all of the podcast elves who work busily behind the scenes to get this show on the road. Without them, we really would be stuck. So massive amounts of thanks to you. And finally, just want to wish everyone a very restful, festive break. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all our listeners who have tuned in to our episodes of The Green Room by Deloitte this year. We'll be back next year answering more big questions. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.